During the first few months of the second Trump administration, many analysts asked if Washington would fundamentally revise its approach towards Central Asia. Now, in early 2026, it appears that such a revision is indeed underway. In November 2025, President Trump received the leaders of Central Asian countries in Washington, D.C. And since then, and before that even, Azerbaijan and Central Asia are increasingly being viewed not as separate regions, but as part of a single geopolitical and increasingly geoeconomic space. Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have also emerged as founding members of the Board of Peace, unveiled in Davos, Switzerland on the 22nd of January this year. Well, you're watching Context, and I'm Orkan Amashov here. And joining me now in the studio is Professor Nurbulat Nishimbayev, political analyst from Turan University, Kazakhstan. Nurbulat, what a great delight to welcome you here in the studio.
Thank you so much.
Well, a lot has happened over the past year or so. Basically, Kazakhstan joined Abraham Accords last year. Azerbaijan is not a member of Abraham Accords, but relations with Israel are very strong, and many would say there is no need for that formality. But also, three countries of our region, wider Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan, are founding members of the Board of Peace. What do you make of this? Is Central Asia, wider Central Asia, already emerging as pivotal element when you look at it from the perspective of Washington's foreign policy designs in this wider region?
That's a very important question. Definitely, in the last few years, we have seen geopolitical reconstruction of the global politics. Central Asia is not exception in this matter. So, in particular, in Abraham Accords, later on, a Board of Peace, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan trying to find its a place in new geopolitical reality. So, believe it or not, now we see unpredictability on the global politics. How is changing ways taking us. So therefore, these steps, bright decision of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan joining Board of Peace, one of the first nations, along with Azerbaijan, it shows us no matter what happens, those nations, they are looking for pragmatic solution to their state survival at first, because we see in global politics we are changing from institutional liberalism towards a force-based realism, pragmaticalism, let's say. So therefore, I think this is very important to at least to survive and to find allies within this unpredictable periods of time.
What do you make of the Board of Peace as an institution? You haven't got major European powers there. You haven't got UK there, which expressed its objection on the basis of Russia being invited and somewhat involved. France and Germany outrightly rejected any form of participation. The impression given is that you've got President Donald Trump, you've got a number of US allies in the Middle East, you've got countries like Azerbaijan and Armenia, which are part of the wider sort of system there, which is emerging now. In particular, I suppose, without 8th of August breakthrough in Washington, Azerbaijani presence on the board would have been probably impossible. What do you make of this configuration? Is it an alternative to the UN, or is it just a part of the new order which is emerging, which could potentially, but not necessarily, replace UN at some point? Because we remember that the letter sent by President Donald Trump to different potential founding member countries had a very clear reference to the UN Security Council resolution adopted in November. Therefore, many would say, despite the fact that the original remit was about Gaza and the current remit appears to be very wide-ranging, it is still UN-mandated initiative because of that reference to the UN Security Council resolution adopted in November.
Exactly. The Board of Peace shouldn't limit with Gaza. Mm-hmm. It has a strong ideological background, I think. Few years ago, if we go back just 10 years from now, definitely there was a debate with the Western lead international order and the Chinese lead in the example of BRICS. Mm-hmm. Now we see the Trump lead organization with membership annually around $1 billion. Yes. So the difference is here, Trump lead this project, it seems it has no strong ideological background which offers the global order, we still not sure what kind of principle it relies on, comparing how the vision it offers, how the conflict should be prevented at least. But anyhow, the most important thing you have mentioned, well, before the declaration of the border peace, USA declared they are going to withdraw from several United Nations institutions. If we consider that United States is funding most of the endowment for the United Nations. So we see definitely the crisis of liberalism, the crisis of international institutions. So therefore, I think the change needed United Nations at some point in crisis, but it doesn't mean the border peace will replace United Nations, at least this kind of world order which we have been created since World War II. So therefore, I think the future is, we have more questions than answers. Definitely it will establish after certain engagement, definitely the voice of Europe, the voice of China, and the voice of United States. So in this regard, the global world order is, now we are entering to the post-liberal order, but we are not sure yet what to call the upcoming orders. Probably it will be multipolar world order based on the various ideological confrontation.
I mean, the president of Finland in Davos, Switzerland, when he was delivering his remarks, said that basically the UN system, UN Security Council and so forth, outdated. They reflect post-1945 realities, and that UN structure is built in the image of the Western world civilization, and now a new order needs to emerge. And he described 2026 in the same way he said that people would describe 1918, 1945. And what he said there was very interesting. He said that the new world order should be more inclusive towards global South countries. I mean, this piece of Board of Peace structure looks like US together with a number of global South countries. Yeah. Therefore, perhaps this could be part of that new world order. More about Central Asia. Over the past year or so, we have seen Azerbaijan as a country in this region, South Caucasus, and other side of the Caspian Sea, are being increasingly viewed as part of one geoeconomic and geopolitical space. And Azerbaijan was accepted to the organization, to the consultative body of the heads of state, heads of government of Central Asian countries late last year. How has it happened? Because I remember from 90s, from early 2000s, everybody was talking about necessity of seeing Central Asia and South Caucasus together. But what has made this emergence of this one geoeconomic space possible just now in late 2025, early 2026?
Exactly, that's win-win situation for us, but South Caucasus and the Central Asian nations. But one of the reasons which we were able to re-innovate such a kind of integrated project is the sanctions against Russia. First, the second reason is the conflicts between Ukraine and Russia, because since 2022, most of the Kazakhstan experts and most of our southern pipeline roads were under crisis, sometimes continuously interrupted. So it forced Central Asian countries to find alternative roads rather than northern roads. So therefore, for South Caucasus and the other Central Asian countries, it was first strategic priority to create a bridge by the Caspian Sea between Europe and Central Asia. South Caucasus plays a very important role. The second is diversification of the foreign policy, not only on trade and on other values as well. So therefore, I think this is a historical moment for the Turkic nations, let's say Central Asia plus South Caucasus countries, to get maximum in this transformative geopolitical changes, because all the success, all the new construction comes after this kind of changes in geopolitics. So now we are living in transformative periods. I think it's up to the leaders and the bright decision makers how to create future world orders in our region, creating a strong geopolitical bridges with South Caucasus and Central Asia for the long term.
Nurbulat, I just want to clarify one point. To what extent the importance attached to the Middle Corridor and to its prospects contingent, the importance itself is contingent upon the continuation of the war in Ukraine? Because we understand Middle Corridor has got a very basic fundamental principle lying at the heart of it. connecting China with Europe via Central Asia, through Caspian, via South Caucasus and Turkey. This particular route, Middle Corridor, means the avoidance of Iran and Russia.
Yeah.
So let's reflect on Russia and Iran separately. To what extent the vitality that we tend to attribute to the Middle Corridor is contingent upon the current situation in Russia? If Russia's relations with Europe and the United States of America happen to be better than they are today, what will happen to the prospects of Middle Corridor, you think?
That's one of the first critical aspects of the Middle Corridor. That's very interesting. But I think from Middle Corridor, Russia also wins, because Russia historically during the Soviet period, most of the trade routes were westernward. So in the last few years we have seen conflict. They're also trying to find new alternatives. So therefore, new Middle Corridor project, I think it will bring new opportunities for Russia exporting the oil and gas by bypassing Kazakhstan to Europe. So for long term, the Middle Corridor, it's a new name of the Silk Road. Historically, if you've seen those lines, starting from the western of China, ending up by Central Asia, Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, Europe, that's one of the classic routes. Historically and in the future, I think this route will reinvent and will be one of the main trade routes regardless to any political changes, because we need it. Otherwise, the Central Asian countries, one of the landlocked nations, they have no alternative for others. But of course, we can't compare the volume of the trade on Middle Corridor with other traditional established corridors. So therefore, that's a matter of time, I think, to creating strong, emphasizing in structural foundation of this Middle Corridor projects. But for the long term, no one will lose from this one. It will create kind of the platforms and the logistical aspects for the future.
Also, I would like you to reflect on what's happening in Iran, not in the context of what's happening inside the country, but what may come out as a result of any potential change there. We all take it for granted, all of us practically, that the Islamic Republic of Iran will never change its fundamental position regarding Israel, regarding US. It will never be integrated in the wider regional connectivity. But assuming that Iran is sort of in one way or another recalibrating its position, what will become of this region, South Caucasus? Because basically it is very clear the importance attached to Azerbaijan as an energy supplier to the West, as a wider conduit between connecting Central Asia with Turkey, is also largely contingent upon the fact that you cannot connect Central Asia with Turkey via Iran. What if Iran comes to the equation as a Western aligned actor? What sort of bearing it may have upon the wider geopolitical landscape?
If we look at in a wider scope, Iran has a very strong influence to Central Asia and to these regions. So therefore, whatever happens in Iran, it definitely will have impact to other regions. The first aspect I would mention the logistic again, because Iran for Kazakhstan is a kind of one of the gate to the Gulf states. With the territory of Iran, the other new emerging train links with Iran, but in the latest changes in geopolitics, in particular in Iran and its policy toward the United States, definitely it's changing the new rule of the game in Central Asia with Iran, with Azerbaijan. Definitely, I think for the long term, regardless how ends the ongoing situation in Iran, it will create some lessons, it will give lessons, and it will create new reestablishment on the relations between South Caucasus and the Central Asian countries. Otherwise, this is one of the, in security aspect, in energy aspect, one of the very important partner actually, but in the last few years we have seen the permanent conflict and the many other diplomatic challenges. So therefore, this is the time of change. I think Central Asia and the South Caucasus nation will learn some lessons, whatever happens in this place, but it has some influences for the long term.
And we know that, Nurbulat, just yesterday, a few days ago, Israel's foreign minister was here, was in Azerbaijan, and next stop is Kazakhstan, probably already in Kazakhstan, I imagine. And Israeli officials talk about Caspian vector connecting Azerbaijan with Kazakhstan. So it seems that from the Israeli perspective as well, in particular, I would like to bring the conversation to the point about Abraham Accords. This Caspian vector is incredibly important. What is your evaluation of the involvement of Kazakhstan and potentially in the fullness of time Azerbaijan in the Abraham Accords? Why do those countries need to be there? Particularly bearing in mind that relations have always been very good. Why to be part of the Abraham Accords? What is specifically unique about that scheme that United States in particular is interested in such a way that it wants to see those countries there? Because I remember when President Donald Trump congratulated President Aliyev just a few months ago, before the 8th of August breakthrough, there was a mention of both Armenia and Azerbaijan becoming members of Abraham Accords.
I think the answer to the question lies on the multi-vector foreign policy of Kazakhstan, not only Kazakhstan but other Central Asian countries. Usually Central Asian countries, they try to find alternative ways and to create a balance of power. So the attempts to joining Abraham Accords is the response, because we have declared a two-state solution on Middle East at the United Nations level, many others, but at the same time we have structural relations, we have embassies of Israel in Kazakhstan and air flights, many other economic relations. But regardless to this success, we have joined Abraham Accords. It shows our position that we are not on a single side. We are foreign policy kind of pragmatic and try to find on both sides. So therefore, I think it has a strategic meaning for Kazakhstan. Also, not only Kazakhstan, but Uzbekistan, many other countries may be on the list in the future to be joined on Abraham Accords. But again, this comes from the first security priority. The second, of course, is economic integration, economic relations with Israel and with the Western allies, with the United States as well.
You already mentioned that Kazakhstan has been pursuing multi-vector foreign policy. In fact, this has been the case since the 90s, of course. Kazakhstan is a massive country. We're talking about a country, the territory of which is around 2.7 million square kilometers. Population is not massive, 20 million. Bordering with a number of big actors, the neighbors Russia, China, and so forth. It's a very big and consequential country in terms of its potentiality. How has Kazakhstan's multi-vector foreign policy changed over the past few years? Which particular neighbor has become less powerful, and the influence of which neighbor of Kazakhstan is getting stronger and stronger? How do you see this evolving situation there?
So if we look at since fall of Soviet Union, let's say, we have declared multi-vector foreign policy, but over the last 3 decades we have seen some transformation on the multi-vector foreign policy itself. It has several times tested by the sides. They said it's a time to pick a side. It's not going to be kind of neutral. So I think we have been got into some stages, in particular with the conflicts in the region, in particular in 2014 in Ukraine, and the conflicts later on in 2016 between Turkey and Russia regarding the military others. So therefore now the multi-vectorism, from ideology it became into full strategic foreign policy. I wouldn't say some states' role lessened, but I see the role of the China comparing with the early 90s definitely rise in terms of economy, in terms of logistics, many others. In terms of security, of course, this Russia states primary aspect. Also, we see the increasing role of Turkic states. Also, on the West, the European Union becoming one of the partner in rare materials and in AI and many others. So therefore, the role of the external partners depends on the field of the collaboration. So therefore, we definitely say the security political aspect with Russia, the economy with China, and in human rights, on international institutionalization, and many other aspects, diplomatic aspect, European Union becoming. So that's a matter of time. Definitely, this year we have seen also strong rise interest with the Middle Eastern countries too. In particular, Qatar, Jordan, many others. They are also bringing their attention in investment sphere. So. For the last 30 years, multi-vector foreign policy became from the concept as a multi-vectorism to the concept of middle power states. Now, if we look at the global politics, like Canada, UAE, or Australia, they try to show themselves as a middle power states. If you look at the foreign policy, that's pretty similar with the multi-vectorism, but they call it, use different words.
Isn't it? The world is changing and changing quite drastically in a very palpable way. One more question about, you mentioned about the Organization of Turkic States relation with Turkey and Azerbaijan. I don't know, probably China must be Kazakhstan's biggest trading partner, I imagine, in terms of the intensity and the extent of economic interaction. In terms of the export of its energy resources to Europe, Kazakhstan remains reliant on Russia. Yeah. Some of those resources go to, naturally, China. Azerbaijan plays a certain role in terms of enabling Russian, the Kazakh oil to be transported into Europe, but that's only 5% of overall Kazakh export to Europe. There are certain limitations, geographic limitations. Caspian Sea has not yet become a sea of connection, but rather it remains sea of division in a logistical sense of the word, of course. But still, I want to clarify one more point regarding bilateral trade. When I was in Kazakhstan a few months ago, I think in October, the bilateral trade turnover between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan is only $1 billion US. I mean, this is not a massive figure. I mean, when we talk about Organization of Turkic States, naturally, cultural, linguistic affinity is important, but there must be also strong economic content. And it looks like for all the talk about middle corridor, for all the talk about connectivity, that economic element is not there as yet. How important is the lack of that economic substance going to prove to be, and what should be done to enhance that element?
Exactly, it's the same situation. We can compare it with the European Union integration, how it went for. So usually the institutional integration without economic core, it's not going to work for long term. It will be for short-term projects. So strategically, I think the economic and the financial aspect of the Turkic world states, that's very vital for all member states in order to sustain for long term. Otherwise, all the ideological and the declaring cultural capital city one by one, it will be good, but in a sense, in real works, economic aspect, for example, creating common economic zones, removing external barriers, that will definitely help, and the ordinary citizen will feel that we are changing, we are creating better environment, because at the local shop store, we see some Turkish products cheaper than the comparing the Western products. So therefore the economic cores, but the second aspect, such a kind of strong policy, it needs a time. For example, the early 1950s, when the 7 countries declared Economic Commission, European Union, it took a time, but I think Turkic states as well, they have around 200 million populations. That's a massive market, definitely. But the point is how to create common sense, how the economic inequality, the gap among this one will stop it. Then it will create a new paths, common economic visions that will be the heart of the economic integration and the so-called Turkishness, I think.
Indeed, yes. So the very foundations of what will become economic space are still sort of being laid down, and it will take some time. It's very interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Nurbulat Nushanbayev from Turan University. It was a great delight to converse with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, what has become probably very clear from this conversation with Professor Nushanbayev is that sheer pace and scale of change unfolding around the world and Central Asia is absolutely staggering. Well, US foreign policy is changing, and Board of Peace is a very good example of that sort of change. Regional powers from Turkey to Azerbaijan, from Kazakhstan to Jordan are recalibrating as they should, and naturally, as a cumulative impact of all of these developments, the very strategic map of the wider world is being redrawn. Well, you've been watching Context, and see you very soon indeed.